What were the key lessons from 2024's real estate market, and how can investors turn those insights into success in 2025? I'm Tim Graham, and the Property Playbook starts now. Welcome to the Property Playbook, presented by hotspotting.com.au, where each episode we empower you with the expert insights and trends to thrive in today's competitive property market. At the start of the year, my co-host Terry Ryder made some bold predictions about 2024 and the best locations to invest. Today, we'll review how those predictions measured up. Terry, thanks for joining me.
You're welcome. Always love talking about real estate.
That's it? You say the hardest part is getting to shut up, isn't it?
Absolutely right. I even talk about it in my sleep, apparently.
That's the way. So look, you made some bold predictions about the best places to invest in 2024, but before we get into where those locations were, tell us, what was the selection process?
Well, our selection process is very much about trying to identify the future hotspots, and future is a really important word. There's no point in telling people about markets that are hot already, which is what media tells people about. So we don't want people piling into overheated markets. We want to tell people that the markets where the buying opportunity is good, but in the long term, these places are going to outperform the general market. That's what we mean by hotspots. So we take a long-term view, we're looking for the future, and we're most interested in the local economy because we believe property is fundamentally local in nature. So we're looking at the strength of the local economy. Is it creating jobs? Is it growing? Has it got diversity, which is really important? But we're also very interested in infrastructure, existing infrastructure, but more particularly future infrastructure spend, because that's a massive generator of economic activity and then jobs, and out of that arises demand for real estate. And some types of infrastructure can be a massive creator of jobs after they're finished. It's not just in building them,
in different parts of the cycle.
The operation of them as well. So those are the factors that we're looking for in choosing locations that we think are going to show outperformance in the long term. We're also overlaying dominant trends that are playing markets as well nationally. So all of those factors are playing into our choices. We look at the data, but at the end of the day, it's about the human element. We make a human judgment.
Okay. So obviously the term hotspots, that's the term that we're using here, the 10 best hotspots to invest. Do hotspots typically mean a bit of a flash in the pan of growth, or is it more of a long-term approach?
Now, I've had this conversation with many people recently, and that I sometimes wish that, back 20 years ago when I started this business, I'd chosen a different term, because media tends to misinterpret what we mean by hotspots as you say, a flash in the pan, a short-term sugar hit type of location, a mining town. We never recommend those sorts of locations. A hotspot for us is a market that's going to outperform the market over the longer term. That's what we mean by a hotspot. So we're kind of stuck with the brand, but sometimes I wish we'd chosen a different term.
Fair enough. So talking about the local market or the national market, according to PropTrack, the market performed for national dwellings in 2024, grew by 4.7%.
Yeah.
How did your predictions shape up?
A lot better than that, I'm happy to say. At the start of each year, we publish our most popular report, which is our National Top 10 Best Buys report. So in January 2024, we put out the latest edition at that time of that report, and there were 10 locations we nominated, and 9 of the 10 did better than double the national average, and a lot of them did better than 20% at a time when the national average was 4 or 5%, depending on whose figures you follow. So really good performance, really pleasing to see that our picks outperformed the general market by so much. But I'll always keep in mind that we didn't actually nominate those places for growth in 2024. We're taking a long-term view. But I suppose it's the perfect investment if, in addition to that long-term growth prospect, you're also getting short-term growth. Yeah. So the property that you buy is actually growing in the first year, because that gives you early equity and allows you to perhaps grow your portfolio by using that to buy the next one.
Okay. So in terms of, you said that 9 out of the 10 at least doubled the national market average. Let's talk about some of the examples that might have even outperformed that.
Yeah. Well, one of the places that we were recommending 2 years ago, and again 1 year ago, because we still thought it had great prospects for growth, was Bunbury in Western Australia, one of the largest and strongest regional centres in Western Australia, which has been very much a growth state in recent years. Kerry Park's one of the cheaper suburbs, and 12 months ago you could have bought there a house in the low 300,000s, and 12 months later, after growth of almost 30%, that typical house is worth in the 400,000. So it's been an almost $100,000 uplift. Yeah, so when you're spending only $300,000 and you're getting $100,000 capital gain a year, that's a really good result. It's a great result because so many investors can't afford to be buying $700,000 and $1 million property. They want to be buying at the lower ends. And the good news is that cheaper property does show really good capital growth.
And typically a stronger yield as well.
Yeah, if the location has something special to offer, and Bunbury certainly had that.
Yeah.
At the other end of the spectrum, the Gold Coast was a market we were recommending because we, kind of reluctantly I suppose, because the Gold Coast has got a bit of a boom-bust history, and I've always been reluctant to recommend it, but there's no doubt that a lot has changed in the Gold Coast. Its economy is a lot more solid.
Yeah.
It actually thrived in the COVID period, contrary to the economists' predictions. And it's been one of the strongest performers in the last couple of years. Carrara, for example, if you bought at the median price there 12 months ago, it was in the 800,000s, but 12 months later, it's 1.1 million. So you've had 25% growth.
Yeah.
You've had capital growth of over $200,000. That's fantastic capital growth for those who were able to buy in that price range. Coming down to the cheaper areas again, one of the unsung heroes, I believe, of Australian real estate is regional South Australia. Never gets talked about. But it keeps on outperforming, and we believe it's still going to perform pretty well at a national level in 2025. But Mount Gambier has been one of those places. You and I know that market quite well. Yeah. It's a great performance, the biggest regional centre in South Australia. You could buy the typical house there for less than $400,000 12 months ago, and now that same property is worth $475,000. There's been capital growth of more than 20%, and you've had $80,000 uplift. Not bad for an investment of, say, around $390,000. Wow. And finally, as an example, again at the other end of the price spectrum, Darlinghurst in Sydney, inner city suburb, where houses are typically 12 months ago $2 million, but 12 months later they're $2.5 million. So if you had bought that medium price house in Darlinghurst, you would have had 20% growth, and you would have added $400,000 to your wealth. But you could also in Darlinghurst be buying more affordable apartments and also having a similar level of uplift, because what we're seeing in markets like Sydney and other parts of Australia is we're seeing units competing on capital growth as well.
Yeah, wow. Yeah. Well, I mean, remarkable results if you think about, doubling it in 9 out of 10, but then we've also got, some of those figures that are 5 times the national average. So it goes to show if you're buying well, you can really escalate your wealth considerably in 12 months. And
what it shows also is that you don't need to be super wealthy to get into real estate. Now, some of our examples I've just given you were when you're buying for 800,000 or in the millions, but there are also a couple of examples there where you're buying in the 300,000s or the 400,000s and still getting 20%, 25% capital growth. You choose your location well. You don't have to be wealthy to do it, but you can become wealthy by doing it. Yeah. So for those thinking, how is it that a city like Melbourne could be in the negative growth in 2024, and then at the same time we've got markets around the country, performing 20, 30%? How is that possible? Situation normal in Australia. It's a huge country. Real estate, you've got to understand this, real estate is local in nature. Economists keep talking about the Australian property market, and it always irritates me because I don't believe we have an Australian property market. We have thousands and thousands of local markets, all driven by local economic conditions. So it's normal to have, in a given year, markets that boom, growing more than 20%, markets that have moderate growth, markets that don't grow, and markets like Melbourne in the last 12 months, which have had moderate decline in their prices. And that's very much local. It comes down to the state government of Victoria. My view, it's the worst state government in the country. They've got the highest property taxes in Australia, and they keep passing new rules and regulations which are highly onerous to investors, and that's I think there's only been 143 changes though. Yeah, that's right. Way too many, and all of them detrimental to real estate consumers buying real estate in Victoria, and that's why the Melbourne market and regional Victoria has been one of the poor performers in recent years. Yeah. Okay, we close the door on 2024. What can we expect in 2025? Well, I think we can expect, to a certain extent, more of the same, in that we're going to see some markets booming and some markets moderate growth and some markets stagnating. But there's going to be new stars emerging, and some of the old stars are going to be fading. Perth has been the national growth leader for the past 2 years. It won't be in 2025. It's slipping down the rankings. There are so many indicators now that the Perth market has peaked, indeed past its peak. and it's not going to be the number one performer. And I note it's interesting that the Real Estate Institute over in Perth has forecast that the price growth in Perth this year they think might be maybe 5%, maybe as high as 10%, but that's a big come down from where it was in the middle of last year when it was like 20% plus.
Yeah.
So Perth isn't going to be the star of 2025. I think it's very much the Queensland story in 2025. And both Brisbane and regional Queensland is coming through all the metrics that we apply, all the research that we do, and also in some of the surveys that other people are doing. And I think probably the surprise of 2025 might be Darwin. That's a market that hasn't performed, doesn't get talked about much. There's a little bit, a little bit of risk element there because it's a bit volatile because of its economy, but I think it's going to do much better this year.
Okay. I want to pause for a second to talk about Perth a little bit more. A bit of a buyer beware type advert. We're looking at some suburbs over there like Baldivis in the Rockingham LGA recently, and we've seen sales volumes, which we monitor as a bit of a precursor to growth. We've seen that Baldivis was getting roughly 300 sales per quarter only back in 2022, and in the most recent quarter it was at least half of that.
Yeah.
So that would indicate that demand's slowing down. But at the same time, I'm seeing days on market are sitting at about 11. So stock is still moving. What would you say to people that are looking at markets like that today?
Look, I think they need to tread very, very carefully, and they need to get really, really good advice about that. I think the bulk of the indicators would say that the Perth market is starting to wane. If you look at the price data coming through from PropTrack and CoreLogic and others, month by month, the annual rate of growth in Perth is falling and falling and falling. The sales activity, as you've just mentioned, is falling. The Real Estate Institute over there says that rent stopped growing about March last year.
Yeah.
A lot of investors have bought, the rental supply has grown, so we're not seeing rental growth anymore. There's other evidence that the rate of population growth into Western Australia is starting to wane. So there's a lot of indicators that saying that inevitably that peak has been reached and passed, and you need to think very carefully about diving into that market now, because you'll be buying at the peak or after the peak of a market that's already had 3 years of growth. There are other better places to buy. People should be thinking in terms of where can I find the next Perth? And those places do exist, and I think the answer to that question is more perhaps Queensland and other parts of Australia in 2025.
Very good. Well, to finish things off, any final tips that you would give to investors that are looking to invest in 2025?
Yeah, I think there's some key trends to be aware of. There's three main ones that I like to talk about sort of at a macro level. The exodus to affordable lifestyle, as we call it, people leaving the bigger cities and moving to regional areas or smaller cities for lifestyle, for affordability, enabled by technology, working remotely. That trend is still very, very strong. So regional markets are quite often in recent years outperforming the capital cities, and I think we're going to see more of that. The rise of apartments, we've been charting the last year or two. Apartments starting to challenge houses on capital growth. That's a big trend which I think has got legs because it's driven by affordability and lifestyle, and also safety and security. And finally, what the markets we call the second wind markets. The markets that had a big spurt of growth up until about 2022, they've paused for a couple of years, they've caught their second wind, they're starting to go again. There's lots of those around Australia. Those are the ones to look for.
Terrific. I think there's some really good tips in there. And for anybody who's looking to find out where those next 10 hotspots would be for 2025, there is an opportunity for you to reach out and grab a copy of the Best Buys, which is Terry's selection for 2025. There'll be a QR code on screen. Take advantage of that. But from all of us here at the Property Playbook, that's the play for today. This is Ticker. We'll be right back.
You're watching Ticker. We'll have more in just a few minutes.